Well, hello again, and as always, I always look forward to spending time with you, teaching the Word, and worshiping with you. So I pray that that is your heart's desire, and I pray that, again, that your heart's desire is to exalt Jesus and bring God the glory He so deserves. Before we jump into that, we have been doing calls to worship, where God is calling us. Yahweh is calling His children into His presence, right? And so we always want to read just a couple passages of Scripture as it prepares our hearts and our minds to worship God and to bring Him glory. Today we're going to take a look at Psalm chapter 5, verses 7 and 8 for our call to worship. Listen to the words of this beautiful psalm by the psalmist as he wrote, starting in verse 7, "But I enter into your house by the abundance of your faithful love. I bow down toward your holy temple in reverential awe of you. Lord, lead me in your righteousness because of my adversaries. Make your way straight before me." I hope that you are excited to worship God and to bring Him glory. Would you please just join with me as we do that, as we gather together in spirit and truth and worship Him through song and the teaching of His Word.
I see is the battle, you see my victory. When all I see is the mountain, you see a mountain move. And as I walk through the shadows, your love surrounds me. There's nothing to fear now, for I am safe with you. So when I fight, I'll fight on my knees, with my hands lifted high. Oh God, the battle belongs to you, and every fear I lay at your feet. I'll sing through the night. Oh God, the battle belongs to you. And if you are for me, who can be against me? For Jesus, there's nothing impossible for you. When all I see are the ashes, you see the beauty. When all I see is a cross, God, you see an empty tomb. So when I fight, I'll fight on my knees, with my hands lifted high. Oh God, the battle belongs to you. Every fear lay at your feet. I'll sing through the night. Oh God, the battle belongs to you. Almighty fortress, you go before us. Nothing can stand against the power of our God. You shine in the shadows, you win every battle. Nothing can stand against the power of our God. An almighty fortress, you go before us. Nothing can stand against the power of our God. You shine in the shadows, you win every battle. Nothing can stand against the power of our God. An almighty fortress, you go before us. Nothing can stand against the power shine in the shadows. You win every battle. Nothing can stand against the power of our God. So when I fight, I'll fight on my knees with my hands lifted high. Oh God, the battle belongs to you. Every fear lay at your feet. I'll sing through the night. Oh God, the battle belongs to you. Oh God, the battle belongs to you.
Can you tell me why you live where you live? Isn't that kind of interesting question to start off? I mean, the question is, why do you live where you live? You know, think about it just for a second. And this isn't overcomplicated. It's just a cool little illustration in a sense. But, you know, why do you live where you live? You know, do you live in a house? Why do you live in a house? What was your reason for purchasing a house? Do you live in an apartment? Why do you choose to rent? Do you live in a condo, a townhouse? Where is it located? Where do you live? Is it in the country? Is it in Blissfield? Is it in Deerfield? Is it Grosvenor? Do you have like a lot of property? Why did you choose to live where you currently live right now? I mean, just think about it. You know, some of us, if we were going to purchase a house, we're looking for certain things, right? You ever watch those shows like on TV? I don't know. My wife watches some of these where they house hunters, whatever, you know, and they got their list, right? I need to have a 2-car garage, right? We need to have 4 bedrooms. We need to have 3.5 baths. And it needs to be all on one floor or whatever, you know, whatever you choose. We need to have a big yard. We got kids. We'd like to have a fenced-in yard. We'd like to have a pool, you know, and there's like this list. And, you know, maybe it's got to be in a certain school district. Maybe it's got to be, you know, within the city or a village or whatever, or you don't want that. You want to be outside. It doesn't matter. I mean, we could talk here for days answering the question, why do you live where you live? We all have reasons, right? But here's the thing, and think about this for a second. Statistics tell us, just for giggles, that younger people tend to gravitate towards, you know, your recreational facilities, the cultural opportunities, transportation, things like that, and possibly like big city type thing. You know, younger people, statistics tells us or shows us that that tends to be the draw for younger people. Older people tend to, you know, as we get older, we tend to be like, yeah, I've had enough of people, right? I've had enough of people. I want to be outside a little bit. So statistics do tell us that's some of the reasons why, or, you know, for age demographics, why we choose to live where we live, right? But here's the deal. When we start talking about this, and we just did it, right? We have a laundry list of things that we are expecting or that we would like to have within our house, right? For me to purchase this house, it needs to be, you know, this list, meet all of these or some of these or whatever it may be. So here's the deal. As we look at that, we look at it more from a consumer perspective, right? I mean, it makes sense, right? I'm a consumer, so we look at it from a consumer perspective. If we're buying a house, a car, all kinds of things, we're in a consumer. It's that consumer mindset where we're purchasing something, so we're just in a different mindset. It's a consumeristic mindset, right? Nothing wrong with that, right? It's perfectly. That's how else would it be, right? I'm glad you asked the question. Because within that, there is kind of a problem, okay? So where it becomes a caveat is shifting from a consumer mindset to something else. Because typically, if we are in a consumer mindset in various categories, such as a car, such as a house, what we eat, what we wear, clothes, whatever, things that we buy, we consume. If we live, the problem is it's not easy, or maybe consciously it's hard for us to slip. But we're a consumer and we kind of stay in that mindset. It's easy to get stuck in that mindset. Okay. Now again, there's times where there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with being a consumer, right? Having that mindset. We're looking for something. We're purchasing something. We want to make a good decision. Absolutely. But here's the deal. If we're not careful, we can carry that consumeristic mindset into every other area of our lives. And this is where it can get a little tricky and can become a caveat. And that's what we want to talk about today, because what can happen is we bring this same consumeristic mindset into the church. We have a list, right? And now the church starts getting redefined differently, especially when we look at the purpose or the mission and vision of the church. Now it becomes a little bit different because I'm coming in with a consumeristic mindset. So I'm coming in, I'm checking things out. I want to make sure I've got my list of what I want and things that need to meet my expectations, some that I can give up on and be a little lax on or whatever. But my point is, it can be a problem because we can bring this consumeristic mindset into places such as the church. And that's not what the church was designed to be whatsoever. And that's what we're going to look at today. In fact, Richard Halverson, he was a former chaplain of the United States Senate. And he says this: in the beginning, the church was a fellowship of men and women centered on the living Christ. Then the church moved to Greece, where it became a philosophy. Then it moved to Rome, where it became an institution. Next, it moved to Europe, where it became a culture. And finally, it moved to America, where it became an enterprise. I think it's very interesting. Kind of the timeline of the church, if you will. And if you think about it, he says in the time, there was a time at the beginning of the church, it was a fellowship of men and women centered on the living Christ. That's what it was. When we look to Acts, when the church began to form, it was centered upon the living Christ. Very interesting what the apostles did after the ascension of Christ, after they received the Holy Spirit. It says that they did essentially three things. They tended to the Word. The church dedicated themselves to fellowship and prayer. Now, the apostles was all about the teaching of the Word, prayer, and fasting. That's what they focused on. That was the center of the church, if you will, at that time. If you remember the whole story in Acts, when the church was taking off, remember they had their first conflict. Some of I think it was the Greek widows, right, was getting overlooked. And so they had a problem. And so they bring it to the apostles. Hey, what are we going to do about this? How are we going to meet these needs? And what did they do? And I think if we did this in our churches today, people would just be like, oh, that is so horrible. That is so insensitive. Listen to what the apostles did. They looked at him and they said, listen, we can't break away from the teaching of the Word, fasting and prayer. We can't break away from that. We just can't. This is the most important thing that we, the apostles, we have to tend to. And we're going to commit to this. We need to organize another group over here that can take care of this. Right? So my point is, when the church first started off, it was all about the living Christ. I mean, it was all about Jesus. And then as you can see over the years, it just kind of gradually takes on more of the culture. It moves to Greece, or to, the Greeks, to Greece, and it becomes more philosophical. Greeks are very philosophical by nature. To Rome, where it became an institution. That's just who they were. Then it moved to Europe, where it became literally a culture. And then finally back to America, where we've made it an enterprise. Think about it. That's exactly, I certainly agree with that. And an enterprise. Many of us view the church as an organization that creates opportunities, content. They're a service to me, a service to you, right? I'm coming to church. This is what I need. This is the checklist. And if I can't find these things, then I need to go shopping for another church that will fulfill the things that I'm looking for. Okay? Now that's the caveat. That can be the caveat, because here's the deal. We're not called to be consumers. We're called to be contributors. And that's what we're going to talk about in this whole series. But real quick, let me just share with you a couple things about consumers versus contributors, okay? A consumer is, I'm here to be served. A contributor says, I'm here to serve. Huge difference. We even talk about this in our E3 groups, our membership class here at Element. We talk about the difference between a member and a partner, and this is exactly what we're talking about. We believe that when we use the word members, it connotates like a consumeristic mindset. Versus a partner, we want it to connotate more of a contributor mindset. Instead of coming and saying, I'm here to be served, here I am, what is it that I can feed off of, and then just leave. But instead, we're asking people to come and invest into the vision and mission and be partners, be contributors to say, no, I'm coming and I want to make a difference. I want to plug in. I want to further this mission and vision that God has given this local body of believers. A consumer is focused on their preferences. A contributor is focused on the needs of other individuals. So it's either about my preferences or it's about, it's the needs of other individuals. A consumer asks the question, what can I gain? What's in this for me? The WIFM. What's in it for me? Whereas a contributor says, what can I give? How can I give? All right? A consumer can have an entitlement to them, an entitled air about them, or perspective about them. A contributor has more of a grateful perspective about them. They're just grateful to be a part of the community and contribute and take place into something that has so much bigger meaning and depth. A consumer has trouble finding a church family because, let's face it, there's always going to be something that the grass is always greener. Something's always happening over here. Maybe I need to go over here or do this because this over here it's like a buffet. We just see all these churches. We just see this buffet and it's just we have some of them have trouble finding a church family because it's more consumeristic. It's more about meeting all of their preferences. Where a contributor joins a church family and invites others to be a part of that. Okay? Now, this whole consuming thing, it doesn't have to be completely negative by any means, but when we bring it into the four walls of the church, that's when it starts derailing what the church is literally about. And this consumer thing, this whole consumeristic thing, we don't really have to teach it to people, right? It doesn't have to be modeled for us. It's like, that's kind of it seems like that's more of our inward nature, right? Our human nature. I mean, we don't have to teach people to be selfish, right? You don't have to teach your kid how to be selfish. You don't have to teach an adult to be selfish. That comes so naturally for us when we make it all about ourselves, okay? So, this whole concept of consumerism really runs deep within inside of us. I don't know if you're familiar with Dallas Willard, but he was a very, I think he taught philosophy at USC, but he was a Christian theologian, very deep. If you ever have the opportunity to read Divine Conspiracy, and he's got a litany of other books as well, but it's a very deep book that is just makes you think. But anyhow, he makes this statement, and he says this. He says, consumer Christianity is now normative. The consumer Christian is one who utilizes the grace of God for forgiveness and the services of the church for special occasions, but does not give his or her life and innermost thoughts, feelings, and intentions over to the kingdom of the heavens. Such Christians are not inwardly transformed and not committed to it. What a powerful statement. I mean, Dallas just kind of lays it out there, does he not? Consumer Christianity is now the normative, and he's saying it's about, a consumer Christian utilizes things, even the things of God, forgiveness of sins, the services of the church, and for their special occasions. For their special occasions. But when it comes to denying self and sacrificing it all, and laying it at the altar of Jesus, well, that's a different story. That's a much different story. So the question becomes, how do we make that shift, and what does that look like? Jesus. When we look at the life of Jesus, what we saw was the church was this gathering, this community. Back in in the early church days, it was a community. Right? It was a community of believers that had a cause. They had a cause, and their cause was this movement of redemption and love that God had placed upon their hearts, and they believed that that could literally change the world. That's who they. That's what they were about. That's what they were centered upon. They were centered upon this being a part of this community with a cause, and that cause being the movement of Jesus Christ, the movement of His redemption and love. Right. So they believed that they could change the world by sharing the gospel and living the gospel out within their lives. They were committed to the mission of the church. Let's take a look at a biblical passage here. Let's take a look at a story found in John chapter 4. And this passage is very familiar to you, but it's quite interesting when we look at it through the lenses of consumerism and being a contributor. Okay? And we're going to see this within Jesus' life, how He obviously was a contributor, correct? He was absolutely a contributor. So let's take a look at this. So this whole story in John chapter 4, and I'm just going to extract out a few verses from that as we talk about that, but I'm going to paraphrase it, put it in my own words. But what took place was the disciples and Jesus were moving about, and Jesus was doing His ministry and He was teaching. Well, they were going through a part of the area there, the geographical area where Samaria was at. Now, we know that Samaria, without going into all these other details, but we know that Samaria was a place that the Jews and the Samaritans did not get along well whatsoever. In fact, the Jews hated the Samaritans. So it would have been easier for them, and essentially what people would do is, instead of taking the shortcut and traveling straight through Samaria to get to the other side where they needed to go back in Israel, they would literally walk miles and miles and miles around Samaria because they just hated the Samaritans that bad. So Jesus, being Himself, no, we're going through it because again, as we're going to look, God was sending them there. There was a mission. There was something that needed to happen that God the Father was instructing His Son to do. So as they're going through Samaria, they're becoming hungry. It's in the middle of the day. They're becoming extremely hungry, need some refreshments, things like that. So the disciples leave Jesus at a well, and the disciples go off into town to buy food. So as Jesus is sitting there, a woman comes and is sitting there, and Jesus and this woman's having a conversation. Now, again, this is very taboo. Jesus is talking to a woman, a man talking to a female, which was not the customs of those days. And on top of that, you had a man talking to a woman, a Jewish man talking to a Samaritan woman. So, I mean, this whole thing is it's out of whack from the get-go, right? But nevertheless, Jesus is sitting there talking to this woman, and they come back and they're surprised to see this take place, but then the woman leaves and goes into the village to talk to the people, right? And so the disciples come to Jesus, and they basically tell Him, hey, we got some food here for you. And Jesus gives this really odd answer, and He says this in verse 32, I have food to eat that you know nothing about. Now, to them, they're like, what do you mean you have food to eat that we don't know nothing about? What happened? How did you get this food, right? So they're kind of standing there, kind of taking this in, and they're like, what's going, trying to figure out what's going on is what they're doing. So then Jesus' disciples respond, and they ask Him this question. They ask each other, they said, in verse 33, could someone have brought Him food? Where did He get food at? And then Jesus delivers the point. He says this, my food is to do the will of Him who sent me and to finish His work. Let me read that one more time, verse 34. Jesus answers and He says, my food, Jesus says, is to do the will of Him who sent me and to finish His work. All right? So, here's the deal. Think about this. What's the first thing you kind of think of when you get out of bed? For the most part. Maybe some of us are a little bit more disciplined and we're jumping out of bed and we're spending time with God and praying and doing our devotions. But would you say typically, for the most part, we kind of get out of bed and the first thing we do, if we don't arrest our thoughts, we start thinking about what? We start thinking about the day. We start thinking about how the day is going to impact Me. What do I need to get done? What's my task list? Where do I need to be? What needs to happen? As soon as our feet hits the carpet, a lot of times it's about me. And it's about, how's today going to impact me? What do I need to do? How do I need to conduct things? What is it that I need to do? First thing I need to do, I need to get some coffee. I need to take a shower. So the whole thing starts off focusing on ourselves, right? But Jesus has this different mindset. Instead of it being about me, instead of it being about what it is that I'm going to do, what's on my schedule today, what's going to impact me, what do I need to manage, it's a little bit different because I think Jesus looks at it and he's saying, what fills me is to fill others. So instead of coming into a day saying, what is it that I'm going to do that's going to fulfill me? What is it that I'm going to do today that's going to impact me the most? Jesus looks at it so counterintuitive, so upside down, inside out, that he's saying this, it's not about me, but it's about others. It's not about me meeting the needs for myself. It's about me seeing the needs of others and meeting those needs. You see, he didn't have a consumeristic mindset whatsoever. Jesus' life was not about consuming whatsoever. When we read about his life, it is a contributing perspective clear from the get-go, not consumer whatsoever. Our default at times is to be consumers. Jesus' default was always about being a contributor, okay? And when you look through John, the Gospel of John, 21 chapters of John, throughout the letter of John, throughout the Gospel of John, we read about Jesus being sent, this sentness, right? 44 times Jesus is sent to do something. Jesus is sent. Jesus is sent. Jesus is sent. Not to consume, but to literally contribute, to pour out. And what's even interesting is he had this conversation with a Samaritan woman. She ends up becoming the same type of person, not a consumer, but now a contributor. Because if you remember that whole story, Jesus is talking about, the life-giving water and, to drink and things. And she's like, that's what I want. I want something that's never going to make me thirsty. I want that. That'll fulfill me. But somehow, as she sees Jesus for who he is as the Messiah, everything changes. And she doesn't become, now she becomes sent. In chapter 4, verse 29, she goes into the village and she's telling the people, come see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could this be the Messiah? You see, because of her testimony, Jesus ends up staying there for a couple extra days, right? Jesus was sent for that particular reason, not to consume, but to contribute. Yahweh himself was using his son to advance his kingdoms. Jesus was sent. This Samaritan woman now, after having an interaction with Jesus, becomes sent. And for us to move from being consumers to contributors, it's essential that you and I understand that we are called to be sent as well. We're not called to consume. We're called to contribute as well. Okay? John 20:21 says this, as the Father has sent me, I am sending you. That's towards the end of John's gospel, and that's Jesus communicating to his disciples. Just as the Father has sent me, now I'm sending you. Now this is because you watched me, you saw how it has taken place. Now I want you to do the same thing. So if we're going to move from a consumeristic mindset to a contributor mindset, we need to understand that we are sent. We're not sent for ourselves. We're sent for God, for Yahweh. N.T. Wright, in his book, John for Everyone, makes this point. He says, the point of receiving the Holy Spirit, it's clear. It's not to give the disciples new spiritual experiences, though to be sure they will have plenty. Nor is it to set them apart from ordinary people, a sort of holier-than-thou club. Though, to be sure, they are called to live the rich, full life of devotion and dedication that is modeled on Jesus' own. But here's the point. Listen to this. The point is so that they can do in and for the whole world what Jesus had been doing in Israel. As the Father has sent me, so I am sending you. N.T. Wright is saying it. He's saying that when we receive the Holy Spirit, it's not so much for us per se, and for our experiences and everything, but I mean it is. That's the power of God. Don't miss that point. But there's a component of it is He gives us the power to be continuing the work of Jesus, to bring glory to Jesus, not ourselves, but to bring glory to Jesus and to follow that same mission as the Father has sent me, I am sending you. You see, God is calling all of us. God is calling all of us to leave this countercultural way of living, to be a part of this countercultural living and to become a contributor, not merely consumers. Where we're not coming in and saying, hey, what is it that I'm missing? This isn't provided for me, so I'm going to do this or do that. No, it's more of a contributor. We're saying, no, maybe God has sent me to do this. Maybe God is sending me to make this happen. And not sending me to another place, but sending me to this place so that we can accomplish that which God has laid upon our hearts to accomplish, which is something that's new that we've never heard before, but we're here to make disciples, right? We're here to make disciples. So let's go back to the question, why do you live where you live? How do you answer that? How do you live where you live? Or why do you live where you live? When I was working on my grad, and some of you may say, well, we're always going to be a consumer. Correct. However, let me give you an example. Let me give you a quick example. I remember when I was in grad school, I had a professor that literally, and this is in Huntington, Indiana, he literally moved into the poorest section, the rundown section, the poorest section of Huntington, Indiana. He moved there. He bought a house there because he was doing a ministry there. He wanted to reach the people in that neighborhood, so he bought a house in that neighborhood. He started shopping at thrift stores. He literally wore clothes kind of mismatched here. But the point is this: he had a very contributory or a contributor mindset. It wasn't consuming. It was, I want to make a difference. So the reason why I live where I live is to make a difference. It's not because it brings me more comfort. It's because I'm here to reach the needs, because God is sending me into this area right here, and I'm moving into this neighborhood right here to make a difference, to contribute, not to consume. Paul writes, and so there's things that we can do. We live out of this selflessness. And again, we've read this passage of Scripture a couple of weeks ago. It says, do nothing, Philippians 2, 3, and 4, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, right? Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others. So if we're going to be contributors, we've got to deny the self. We've got to go selfless, right? We've got to stay committed. We've got to stay steady. We've got to stay committed. Paul writes in Galatians 6:9, let us not become weary in doing good. For at the proper time, we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. We're contributors. We're hanging in there. So this whole series we're starting here today, which is called Love Where You Live, I wanted to challenge us. I want us to think about that. John chapter 20, verse 21, where it says, as the Father has sent me, I am sending you. So these next 3 weeks, that's what we're going to be talking about, in particular, our missions area, our engage piece, and how we are affecting or how we are impacting our community locally, as well as expand it out a little bit more, as well as globally. Okay? And we're going to talk about these things. After the service, here on Sunday, the 27th, we're going to be doing we're going right into the gym to do meal packing for I-92 Ministries, trying to make a difference. Where we raised money to buy grain and stuff to pack 20,000 meals for Haiti. That we believe that's what God is calling us to do. That God has sent us to do that. That God has sent us into this area, into Blissfield, into different areas such as Sierra Leone in Africa, such as India, such as Haiti, Honduras, some of these other places in which we believe that God is directing us to make an impact, right? But we're not called just to consume here. It's not just, what is it that Element has just for me? That's the wrong question. The question is, what is it that I can help provide Element to accomplish its beautiful mission and vision that God has laid upon our hearts? That's nothing that we created. It's what God has laid upon our hearts, answering the question, or following along this whole concept, as the Father has sent us, or as the Father has sent me, I am sending you. And so that's where we're going to be going these next couple weeks. And I pray that you would just kind of click in with us, not just kind of, but you would click in with us, whether you're watching online, whether you'll be here one of those weeks in person, I don't know. But the whole thing is, it doesn't matter where we are, we can make a difference because we are sent. Okay? We are sent. If we have received the free gift of grace and salvation and His love, and we've responded to that, and we have the Holy Spirit living in our lives, we are His ambassadors. We are being sent. Just as Jesus was sent, now He's sending us. We don't want to lose sight of that. And we don't want to lose sight that slippery slope of being a consumer versus a contributor. So I hope you hang with us for this series. I look forward to spending time with you these next few weeks as we talk about love where you live. I hope you have a great week.
Who am I that the highest King would welcome me? I was lost, but He brought me in. Oh, His love for me. Oh, His love for me. Who the sun sets free, oh, is free indeed. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. Free at last, He has ransomed me. His grace runs deep. While I was a slave to sin, Jesus died for me. Yes, He died for me. Who the Son sets free, oh, is free indeed. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. In my Father's house, there's a place for me. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. I am chosen, not forsaken. I am who you say I am. You are for me, not against me. I am who you say I am. I am chosen, not forsaken. I am who you say I am. You are for me, not against me. I am who you say I am. Oh, I am who you say I am. Who the Son sets free, oh, is free indeed. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. In my Father's house, there's a place for me. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. In my Father's house, there's a place